The effectiveness of a lesson. Here is an ESL class that shows us some of the best practices you can have in a lesson and throughout the unit.
I can identify and describe the major features of medieval civilization.
Mr. Wadeen here models some best practices, and in the first minute there we see that he has the students state very clear objectives in a manner that they can understand. So this objective is written as I can, and the students are able to read it and identify with it and understand it.
Can I have a student volunteer read us our medieval times success criteria? I can. Yusuf?
Describe housing. Describe the full bell system.
Feudal system.
Feudal system. Describe recreation.
Recreation.
Recreation. Describe the food they ate.
Eight.
Describe what they more or clothing.
Again, the objectives are written as I can statements. Here Mr. Wadeen has the student read out the objectives and works with him on pronunciation. When I do this, I usually go back and read the whole sentence, so the student would continue to read I can the whole time, just to make sure that the student is getting the sentence structure. But the practice of verbalizing English and the practice of discussing the objectives out loud can really help the students.
I'd like you to brainstorm in partners the equipment needed to play the following sports.
This is another best practice that Mr. Wadeen incorporates into his lesson and unit. He uses partner work, so the students get a chance to talk to each other before they're responsible for speaking in front of anybody else. For language learners, this is crucial because although some students may really just want to talk in the new language, most students are reticent. So getting them comfortable and getting them to discuss everything that you want them to discuss as a class with someone else before they're in the class discussion helps students to gain familiarity with the words that they want to use. A lot of students still have problems with this, so another thing I like to add to it is sentence starters. So we'll see what Mr. Wadeen does next.
Tennis, basketball, soccer, baseball, and football. Papa, great use of a picture dictionary to find the equipment for sports.
Thank you.
Here we see him encouraging the students one-on-one, and the student here is doing another best practice, which is using pictures. ESL students react really well to images of words and concepts because it helps them to gain an understanding. I think that is so clear when you think of yourself learning a different language. If you can see a picture of it, then you know what it is.
I don't know. Yusuf, what have you and your partner been brainstorming about? Soccer and the equipment needed. Okay, what kind of equipment is needed for soccer?
Soccer shoes, soccer dress, soccer shoes, goalkeeper and uniform and bat.
So Mr. Wadeen again is individually practicing students, and he is praising them for independent thinking, which is another really important thing with language learners. A lot of people, when they're learning a language, are afraid to explore new ideas and afraid to come up with something original because they don't have the right words for it. So there you saw the student give an original idea, which was the clothing that you need, and he called it dress. And he didn't know that in English we wouldn't use that word, but he didn't care because he felt so comfortable in his classroom because his teacher is praising him that he used whatever words he could, and his teacher praised that independent thinking.
What have you and Amal been brainstorming? What sport?
Soccer.
Okay, and what equipment do you need to play soccer?
Ball, net, soccer field, pointy shoes, carpet shoes, water to drink, and uniforms.
Wow, great job. You have a very long list of equipment needed for soccer.
So the roaming teacher strategy, we just saw him roam to 3 or 4 different groups of students, and that is really good in ESOL because he's able to gain insight into the students' understanding of the concepts, and he's able to work with them to come up with better ideas if he needs to. Here the students have obviously compiled a list of
Who
words
can read some of
they
our
would need for their medieval times unit. This is excellent in terms of unit planning because they're going to go ahead and at the beginning talk about some vocabulary that they might encounter throughout the unit. And it helps the students at the beginning to gain an understanding of where they're going.
medieval times vocabulary words? Andrew? Okay, can I have another volunteer to read the second column? Papa?
Shear, cloth,
Samurai? Fight. Thank you.
Compiling the information as such allows the students to work together and get ideas from each other. So in a verbal class like that, collaboration is really, really good because the students can add to each other's information. Here's the unit they're going through. I think the unit is a little bit questionable. I hope that the unit somehow works with the students' interests or ties into another unit they're doing in a different subject. Perhaps Mr. Wedine has found out that students at this level really enjoy this sort of information, but from another ESOL perspective, these are some words that might not necessarily be useful in day-to-day English, and it might also be rather archaic information. So I question the student interest and the usage of this vocabulary, but if Mr. Wedine knows something about his students that I don't, then it seems like it could be really a good fit.
Can you translate some of these words into your native?
Okay, so the next thing Mr. Wedine does is works with students to put the information into their native languages. So he has them translate it, whether it's writing characters or describing it in a foreign language. This way the students connect to prior knowledge and they don't lose the literacy that they have in their previous language. Language learners build on a base language, so allowing them to use their native language in their ESOL classroom can grow their English even more. I've heard a lot of ESOL teachers with the no blah 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 language rule. Like in my school, I've heard a lot of no Chinese. And that rule does not actually help the language learners as much as allowing them to explore the commonalities and find the synonyms. It is important for them to use English sentences and to use the English language and not to translate every time. So there's a balance that an ESOL teacher needs to find. But here, translating some of the vocabulary can make the students feel like the teacher is working with them.
Language of Mandarin. Pick any which one to start with.
In the next segment, we see some model reading from the teacher with the student.
You to echo read this with me. Knights used.
Knights used
The long.
the long
Sword.
sword,
Dagger.
dagger,
Lance.
lance,
And battle axe.
and battle axe.
So this echo reading is it's a little different than what we practice in my first grade classroom. In my first grade classroom, we actually practice echo reading with partners. So it's really fun when you can have different levels of reading ability partnered together. Say you have a native speaker with an ESOL student. The native speaker can start the echo and the ESOL student can echo back. Or also as a teacher, I can model it and the students as a class echo back. We in the first grade are working on fluency with reading and using an interesting voice and emotive reading style. So we work on scooping up words in phrases, and that's something that Mr. Wedine did not do here, perhaps to teach the student individual words and help the student to identify letter sounds with letters on the page. There are many different ways that you can do this, but as an ESOL first grade teacher, I would try to scoop up the words in phrases.
No, it wasn't Mr. Allen.
Yeah.
It was?
Yeah.
Me too.
students practicing writing to cement some information that they've learned.
On Saturday and
They're
Sunday.
writing on the poster paper.
How
Looks like they're going to
busy
read
is
it
it
out loud to their classmates.
I see you chose the knight to win against the samurai. Why did you choose the knight?
The supermarket. Tell me what it's like in there.
The knight has a horse and a shield, and their armor is stronger.
So here it looks like the students have sentence starters with I think that.
I think that.
Having those sentence starters allows the students to feel comfortable identifying opinions, which can be very difficult at the beginning phases of writing. Then the students are able to read it out loud and they can identify their mistakes together as a class. Sometimes students are hesitant to do this sort of work individually in front of the class. So one thing that I have done is I've had more than one on the board and I have the whole class read them chorally together, and then we can identify. So it's a little bit more anonymous and allows the students to feel more comfortable in their writing and talking. As you can see from this video, Mr. Woodine truly thought out his unit before he began the lessons. You can see that they went through sort of an introduction where they brainstormed some things that they might need for different sports, and then they went into some vocabulary. They learned new vocabulary and translated it, and then they were able to work with the vocabulary to create opinion pieces. All of this takes careful thought processing from the teacher in order to engage the students, and you can see that the teacher really went about it in a meticulous manner. So, when planning lessons, it is important to look at the whole unit and to think about where am I going with this information, what do I want my students to produce with this information. It looks like here the production phase so far is the opinion piece. And that's one thing always to think about in a unit. What is the goal? What is the product? So it looks like Mr. Woodine's doing a pretty good job. Thank you for listening.